So, what effect has former President Trump's false claims of election fraud had on you personally, and your ability to recruit election workers for this and future elections?
There's kind of a good side and a bad side to the impact of having a former president spread lies about not just our election administration and procedures, but those who administer them, like myself. One, it means people are paying more attention to these offices than ever before, and people are paying more attention to elections and election administration than ever before. That's a good thing, because when you actually look at the system, you see through a transparent lens that it's secure, that it's accessible, that we've got protocols in place to protect the integrity of our elections, and that we're professionals running these elections, and we're doing their job for all voters, not just one particular voter in one particular party. All of that said, of course, his attacks and those of his most ardent followers has created this strain on our work, whether it's actual violence or threats of violence or harassment and requests for duplicative, meaningless information. A lot of the misinformation has metastasized and to people wanting to or trying to interfere with our ability to run future elections. And until there's real accountability for those who are spreading these lies, from the former president on down, we're going to continue to see these tactics as an effort to deter people from participating and make it harder for us to ensure when people vote, their votes are counted. We're going to always stand guard over that process, but certainly we can't underestimate the really detrimental and challenging impact the former president's lies and others and the misinformation that's come from it has had on our democracy.
Yeah. Now, in 2020, local canvassing board in Michigan almost prevented the certification of the presidential election results, which, who knows what would have happened if that had transpired. How can you or Michigan generally prevent that from happening in this election and in 2024?
Well, one, we have the benefit of having overcome those challenges successfully in 2020 under our belt. We know how important it is to engage clerks and people in the process of standing guard with us over our election. So the fact that hundreds of people showed up to demand certification of the election and of their votes in 2020 was really the turning point that enabled us to protect those voices and those votes. I'll always be proud to stand with those folks, but importantly, even chief election officers can't save democracy on our own. We need the voters and people to stand with us. And that is what ensured democracy prevailed in 2020. And that's what will do it again in 2024. Thousands of people signing up to be poll workers, others signing up to observe the process and be prepared to let us know if they see any disruption so that we can stop it. Law enforcement working with us at the local level to ensure the law is enforced, and that if people break the law through intimidating voters, they're held accountable. All of those partnerships and all of that teamwork has really flourished since 2020, putting us in an even better position in future elections to protect against election subversion.
Now, as you know, Michigan has an abortion rights ballot initiative. It was almost knocked off the ballot by several GOP election commissioners, but the Michigan Supreme Court allowed it to get on the ballot. What's the importance of this ballot initiative, and what does it say about the process that almost happened?
Well, first, certainly, truly, literally in Michigan, democracy and citizens' fundamental rights and freedoms are actually on the ballot this year. Voters will be given an opportunity when they vote to amend our state constitution to instill in it expanded voting rights protections and reproductive freedom for every citizen. So it's really critical that people understand the impact of their vote, that it's not just about voting for candidates, but it's also about voting for policies that will protect and impact their lives and their democracy and their rights and their freedoms directly. That said, what we also saw as the effort unfolded to get these proposals on the ballot was that state officials, particularly members of the State Board of Canvassers who have a ministerial role to look at signatures or look at votes and affirm the will of the people, they stood in the way. Two votes stood in the way of that process, and simply because perhaps they didn't like what was the content of the petitions, in that case, if the State Board of Canvassers fails to certify an election or fails to certify a ballot initiative that they have the legal responsibility to certify, we will, as we did then, go to court, and the Michigan Supreme Court will ensure the law is followed. So ultimately, these efforts to at the state level, as long as we have officials in place willing to enforce the law, efforts of partisans to try to stand in the way of the people's voices won't come to fruition and won't succeed. But they certainly created a lot of confusion and chaos around the process itself, which one could argue is part of the strategy.
Yeah. Now, right now, Michigan's Republican-controlled legislature is preventing any further changes in election law. But let's say that wasn't an obstacle. What sort of election system would you want to see? What further changes would you want to see in the election system that would make it better, easier, and more secure?
Well, one of the things I've really seen as a longtime election policy advocate, now as a Secretary of State, is that policies are one thing, but you need the funding and the personnel to bring them to fruition, to actually make sure that they work. And so a lot of times we see lawmakers passing laws, like they most recently passed a law to allow the pre-processing of absentee ballots prior to Election Day without any funding attached to it to enable us to actually hire people to do that pre-processing. So bottom line is we need a sustained source of funding and resources for elections if all of these policies are going to come to fruition. And one of top of my list is to ensure that we have that steady stream of funding, not just from the state, but from the federal government as well for our democracy. And then secondly, on top of that we have more protections for our election workers so that when they do endure threats, they know that there's going to be strength behind them, protecting them and ensuring consequences for those who would threaten them simply for doing their jobs, running fair elections. And then finally, I think in running elections themselves, we need to ensure policies both increase access to the vote and protect the security of the process. And we really have policies in place that do both of those things here in Michigan. So simply ensuring that, for example, the automatic voter registration, the election day registration, the absentee voting processes that we have in Michigan are fully funded and able to come to fruition for every voter, we'll continue to see an expansion of people participating in our elections with those policies in place and with the resources to administer them.